In this big idea video, we're going to talk about some of the ethical issues of oral history and also the question of what happens whenever emotions come out during an oral history interview, which does happen quite a lot. As far as the ethics side of things go, the Oral History Association, the OHA, which is kind of like the governing body to a certain extent of the oral history field, has a lot of information on the ethics of the oral history interview process. And we're not going to go into all of them, but I want to hit on a few. And most importantly, the think of this in terms of ethics, and remember that you're always working with people and that we have an ethical obligation to not harm those people. Now, you may think, well, what harm can I cause just by asking somebody a question? Well, there's a lot of potential harm in asking questions to people, especially when it comes to trauma, when it comes to unsettling memories and that sort of thing. So it's important to remember that your job as an oral historian is to protect your subject. You should not do anything that can cause them physical or, more for our purposes, emotional harm. So keep that in mind. You are responsible for not causing harm to your subject, to your participant. Again, we're not therapists, and we're not, testing, researching things on human subjects, but to a certain degree, we are exposing people to potentially some bad memories. So keep that in mind. And you need to also remember that when it comes to ethics, that, we have a certain trust that's being placed upon us whenever we talk to these people. We are getting sometimes their very intimate memories they would not just normally tell to anybody, but they're going to share with us. So we have a duty to a certain degree to ensure and entrust those memories are remembered and put down and recorded accurately. We don't want to do anything that's going to embellish those memories. We don't want to do anything that's going to cause anyone any embarrassment. We don't want to do anything that's going to not lie necessarily, but we don't want to do anything that's going to allow those memories to be altered in any way. Our job is to keep the memories as they are, as they are recorded. So we also, again, have a duty here to protect the memory that's been entrusted to us through the story, through the oral history process. And there's more about ethics. This is one of the reasons why you've done the training on the ethics training to be certified there, because you need to understand that even though this is a history class and we don't normally talk about human beings and subjects and the ethical implications of certain projects, that is kind of folded into the idea of oral history. Do no harm. So what happens then? Moving beyond ethics for this discussion, what happens whenever we start talking about emotions? What kind of emotions can be kind of brought to the surface during an interview process? And it does happen. Like I said, emotions, people can remember things from their past that they haven't thought about in ages, and suddenly they're talking about them for the first time, and the next thing you know, bam, they're crying, or they're angry, or they're upset, or they're getting agitated. And this can happen. Now, again, you're not a therapist. None of us are therapists here. So we're not really trained and equipped to solve the problem. Our best bet, our best way to help in this moment is to be empathetic, to be understanding, to nod your head with them, to be sympathetic, to, support them in that moment. Whether it's just, staying quiet, maybe offering them a Kleenex of some sort. If they are, getting a little bit teary-eyed. Our best job, or the best we can do in that moment, is to be empathetic to the person telling us their story. Now, outside of that, if it's something that seems very traumatic, we can maybe recommend that they go seek professional assistance. Maybe we have a grief counselor that we could send them to, or we have some sort of idea of help they can receive from a trained professional to work through the trauma that maybe came to the surface during our discussion. But for the most part, that's probably not going to happen. We're not going to hit on subjects that are going to unleash this repressed memory, most likely, to where their lives are altered forever. Our job is to, or at least in this early stages anyways of oral histories, is to just record the memory, is to make sure that these emotional memories are recorded for future use and for posterity. So we're hopefully won't drill down into, these distinct psychological aspects of people's lives. That's not really our focus. Ours is more the historical side of things. Um, but emotions do happen, and you have to be prepared for it. For instance, in one of my interviews, I was talking to this man who had served in World War II. This is earlier on in my career as a grad student, getting my master's, and he told a very traumatic story for him, something that he hadn't thought about in a long time. In fact, he told two stories in the same interview. The first, he was talking about basic training, and he was in Oklahoma going through basic training for the Navy. And he talked about how it was all kind of mundane stuff, boring stuff, but then he started talking about what he remembered at night. And the thing that really kind of made him emotional was talking about how he remembered this one person who had a guitar, and he would play music every night on the guitar, and it just, and as he's telling me this story, you can kind of see him getting teary-eyed. This 80-year-old man getting teary-eyed, remembering something that he probably hadn't thought about in a long time. And so that is bringing out emotion in someone. And again, I'm not there to fix the problem, right? In this case, I don't really want to fix the problem because I want that emotion, because I want to make this emotion something that is evident for posterity. So my job in that moment is to just be empathetic with him, to understand what he's going through, and then to let him, talk it out to a certain degree. And that same guy talked about another story where he was a mechanic on an aircraft carrier, and he was working in Alameda, California, at the Navy base there. And this is a much more horrific story, and something that probably caused him a lot of trauma that, again, he probably had not thought about in a while. And you could see him, as he talked about it, get tenser and, again, get a little more distant whenever he talked about it. And his story was about how a crewmate of his accidentally backed into the propeller of a moving plane. The plane's propeller was moving, and the man backed into it and was killed. And so this was a traumatic experience in this person's life, from 50 years earlier, 40 to 50 years earlier, and he's telling it, on camera to me, and that's causing him an emotional distress. So again, I'm not a trained therapist, right? So my job there is to be empathetic and to understand what he's going through, just like yours would be in that situation. You're not trained to help someone through the grieving process or through a traumatic experience, but you can be there to listen to them. So it's important to keep that in mind. We are not trained therapists, but there will be moments where where we are faced with people going through certain emotions that we need to be prepared for, and at the very least be ready to lend an ear to and to be empathetic with as they discuss that emotional moment.